Chuck, if you could go back and start all over again, is there anything or one thing that you would change about the museum that you created?
Well, you know what? Really, we have no regrets about any part of the museum and all the years that we've. It's a big part of our life and all the time we've spent putting it together and stuff. I think, as I think back, really have no regrets. Just it's been just a great thing in my life and also my wife and our whole family. But it's all about my dad. He was the collector. And when he started collecting, well, we were first in business, and I noticed in one part of our plant, he brought in an old wooden ice box, just a piece of junk ice box, wooden, and it was on the side there. And then he would bring in all these old rusty tools and stuff. And I'm a cleaner upper. I like things cleaned up, and I was thinking to myself, well, what's going on over here with all this stuff? And then it get more and more, and it was just his passion. He liked that kind of stuff. So in time, then we built a whole mezzanine level to put because he kept getting more stuff. My parents were big travelers, and they traveled all over the country. And when they did that in their motorhome, they would bring back ice artifacts, and they continued to do this. And we built this mezzanine level, and he filled that up over a few years, and so they continued to bring things back in their motorhome. And there were times when we had to get help from some of our production guys to come out and help unload some of this stuff out of the motorhome. There was big stuff in there. But then we decided to move the museum and build a building across the way from our ice plant. And half the building was going to be for his ice artifacts. And the other half was going to be for our toys, my boat and his motorhome. So we built it, and it was all good for a while, for a couple of years. And pretty soon he started pushing our toys out with all of his stuff. So then we decided to build. I pushed a little bit on this. We decided to add on to that building. So he adds on, and he continues to bring more stuff in, and it just kept coming. So we added on probably 3 or 4 times onto this building. Finally, after many years, we moved right out of the building and moved our toys somewhere to another building back in the back part of our property. And he had the whole building for his ice artifacts in it. And at that time is when we really started calling it a museum.
Gotcha.
And it was just heartfelt, the whole process and the whole thing. And I look back on it as an important part of my life. So we had the museum out there, and we needed, and I'm getting ahead of my whole story, because then we sold our business at that one point, and in time, we knew we were going to want to move that ice museum out of there. And we looked all over for a building and property, and it took us a year or two to find a place. Anyway, we found a great place in the city, in the Port Huron, downtown, and it was just a great location. And the important part of this location was it was a furniture store that years ago, a very successful furniture store in town, but years ago it had a fire and it completely burnt the place down. And so when they rebuilt it with all concrete, and they had a sprinkler system throughout the whole building. Just incredible sprinkler system. And this was something that we really felt we needed for these ice artifacts, because at this point, my dad had collected a tremendous amount of stuff.
Sounds like it.
So we moved it downtown, and that's where it is right now. That's where I am right now, and it's been a great location. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Chuck, I wanted to take a moment and introduce you. Chuck is a retired iceman who used to own Party Time Ice Company, that was a statewide provider of ice in Michigan. Chuck was the chairman of the IPIA back in 2001 and was named to the Ice Hall of Fame in 2010. Chuck is also well known for his work in creating and managing the Knowlton's Ice Museum of North America. And that's the museum that we're talking about today. So, Chuck, I want to give you a chance just to kind of speak to the different images that you've sent us of the Ice Museum, the different artifacts that you have. And so just take us through this a little bit here.
Okay. That is a 36 Chevy uh, truck that we acquired from a company in Chicago. And that truck actually was in the series The Untouchables, the TV series.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so that was an important addition we made to the museum. We went over and picked it up in Chicago, and it's one of my favorites. But that's what that truck is.
All right.
And we still we up till a couple years ago, we still would take that in parades. It
Oh,
was a
cool.
reliable truck. Yeah. This is an antique ice box, and the ice, of course, would go in the top, and then the food and stuff would go down in the bottom. And that's an old wooden one,
Hmm.
very rare and a real nice ice box. Yeah.
All right.
That is a that's. I'm sorry. This is the 36.
Okay.
Oh,
The
okay.
other one, the other truck, I believe, was a 38. Now this 36 Chevy. The other one was a Ford. This is a 36 Chevy, and we bought this from another ice guy, and he was over in Grand Rapids. And we had it was a 1 ton pickup truck, and we had the replica of the ice box on the end of it made. And what it is, it was a wholesale would be a wholesale box where they would take the big blocks and put in there, and then they would haul them out to maybe a railroad or a big customer that took a lot of ice.
Okay.
I noticed right behind the truck. I think those are license plates. Is that correct?
They are.
What's the significance of those?
Well, my dad was a collector of not just ice artifacts, but he collected just all kinds of stuff. And he also had an extensive collection of license plates from just everywhere, and really some old rare ones too. The top one on the left, and I don't think you can see it right there, but the top one on the left was a leather uh, license plate but from way back, probably very early 1900s.
Let's jump over
So,
real quick if you want to, since we were talking about it. You were telling us about, what you'd done before. Tell us, about Party Time Ice and your choice to sell it, and just take us through that lineage because you obviously have obviously a family aspect to all of this. So if you can tell us about Party Time
Pretty
Ice.
time ice, yeah. My when Our family, when I was real young, back in the mid 40s, uh, my dad got out of the military, out of World War II, and he got in the milk business, and he was a home delivery milkman, and he grew that business up until when I was probably 12 or 13 or 14. He grew it up into several routes. By the time I was 16 and I had a license, then I started driving a milk truck in the summertime and selling milk to the people that came up along the lake in Michigan on Lake Huron. So we're in the home delivery milk business, but it was going downhill, very very competitive, and it was just dog eat dog, and it was just an awful business to make a living at anymore. So my dad and I discussed it, and we were going to get in another business together. And we looked at all kinds of things: a Bonanza Steakhouse, a United Rental, motel chains, just all kinds of things. We didn't come up with anything, and he was still in the milk business when I Ended up Vietnam War was on, and I ended up going in the Navy. So I'm 3/4 of my way through my Navy a little career, and I come home on leave, and my dad's in his garage bagging ice into brown paper bags. And so I got some conversation going on with Dad. What are you doing here? Well, I bought this couple ice makers from my friend in the gas station business, and I've been selling ice. And he said that the first year that was just starting, and I was getting out of the Navy in probably 6 months, and he said, but the first year was just horrible. He said he thought he made a big mistake, and so anyway, I gets out of the Navy. I takes over the milk routes, and I'm taking care of the milk routes, and he's running this little ice business, and pretty soon he can't handle it. So I start making some of the deliveries and alongside of the milk routes, and he's doing a production end. And long story short, it just kept growing and growing. And I would then be working more on the ice business than I was on the milk business. And so then I kind of, between the two of us, we decided I'll become a partner. So I bought a 3-ton with these. When he started, he had 2 cold draft ice makers. They made 400 pounds apiece. That's 800 pounds production. He made 800 pounds a day in his garage. So after a couple of years, and we bought more of them little ice makers and kept adding them to the production, we decided I'd become a partner, but we needed more production. So I bought a 3-ton ice maker. Big deal at the time for me, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we got it installed, and my dad and I were standing there, and we were standing there looking at the thing. It was running, and I said to my dad, I said, "How in the world are we ever going to sell 3 tons of ice?" I mean, I really did. I was so serious.
Right.
We discussed it, and so anyway, we continued to grow, and then we bought out our first little ice company. It doubled our business, and then we continued from there. We continued to grow and buy other ice companies, and back then, we would be making more ice, and so I would be out looking for new customers. And seriously, now this is back because I got out of the Navy in September of 1968. So this is probably late 60s, early 70s probably. I'm going down roads and highways picking the places that I would like to put an ice box in, the party stores. They didn't have ice. Most of the ice back then was sold out of vending machines, the great big vending machines. That's where it was all sold. In the big ice companies, they had the vending machines, and there were a few scattered here and there. There was one, the closest one to us was about 12 miles away up in a place we called Lakeport. And it was owned by City Products Corporation. I think it was owned by Household Finance. But City Products was the biggest ice company in the United States at the time, big company. And so we were kind of fighting them a little bit, but they started to get in the ice boxes too, and we're out. But seriously, I'd be going down the road, and I would pick the places that we wanted to put ice boxes. And so we continued to grow, and then the City Ice, they would get mad at us because then we started taking some of their customers. But they didn't really know the new way to make ice and to deliver it and all this stuff. They were stuck in the old way.
Right.
They made it out of big blocks, and we had fragmentary ice. That was the turbo machine. And so we kind of had a little bit of an edge on them, and we continued to take business. And I remember, but one time I remember, we had our first truck was a pickup truck, and we had a box on it that we had put ice on. We could probably put 200-300 bags in there. And then we had an old junk trailer. It was refrigerated, and I would haul that behind me, and I'd be out delivering. Well, I was going down the road, this area, probably 30-40 miles from our plant, and here comes a great big City Products ice truck. And he comes by, and the guy in the truck looks down at me and he's just laughing. He's just pointing to the buddy in his truck, and he's just laughing at me. I never forgot this. And so years and years and years later, we bought that company,
Yeah.
and that
Nice.
was heartwarming to me. Believe me.
That was satisfying,
Yeah,
right?
it
Absolutely.
really was.
Absolutely.
So
Well,
anyway, we continued to grow and buy other companies and get new people. And one other little story was right at first there, my dad and I were working. We had one employee, and anyway, the employee didn't show up one morning. So my dad and I are standing there wondering, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We need this guy to come in and help.
yeah.
And so we're kind of trying to figure out, well, you do this, I'll do that. Well, then the kid, just a kid, comes walking down the road and come into work and made the day. But yeah,
Yeah.
never forgot it.
Well, good deal. So you probably have the best background that we've had of any of our guests thus far, Chuck. So I'd like to know, what is the significance of all those images and pictures that are behind you?
Well, Ethan, that's very nice of you to say that. And yes, this is our, you can't see it, it's the sign above my head there. It's the IPIA Hall of Fame.
Oh,
And um, it's all of our members that have been inducted in the Hall of Fame since the association started. Well, not since it started, because in the very early years of the association, uh, they certainly didn't have this the technology that we have with the photos and everything. Um, but it's just the highest honor that somebody can get in our industry. And all these folks, I know a lot of them, and it's housed in our museum because IPIA didn't, when Jane and I talked, and I was chairman years ago, she wondered, she had been through the museum several times, and she wondered if we could house it for them. And I said, sure, absolutely. It'd be an honor. It's an honor to have it in our museum.
absolutely.
And our association, when we joined years and years ago, it was NIA, and then it became PIA, and then IPIA.
Right.
NIA was National Ice Association, then Packaged Ice Association, then International Packaged Ice Association. So it's our association is grown and had growing pains along the way, but um, so it goes back before IPIA.
Yeah.
When we asked you earlier if there was one thing with our outset question that we had, if there was one thing you could change, when I heard you talking, I would say probably one thing you would have built a lot larger building to start with, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah, we learned our lesson along the way on that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no worries. Well, but that's
Right.
part of the growing pains, right? So,
Yeah.
So we do want to kind of transition back to looking at the images that you've shared of the museum. What are we looking at here?
These are ice axes, and in the early days, it was called natural ice, and that was not when they cut ice out of the rivers and lakes, and they would score the ice first with with an ice plow. And a horse would pull the ice plow, and it would
okay.
score the ice, not all the way through, just deep enough so that later on, otherwise, if it got too deep, though, of course, the ice would break and the horse would fall through,
Well,
which
they go
happened,
in the drink,
which
yeah.
happened many times. And but so then after they scored it, and they would go back and forth and crossways, then they would take these different tools and either chop or hack at them to break the big blocks off. And they were roughly, they were hundreds of pounds, anywhere from 100 to maybe 400 pounds, depending on what they needed. But that's how they would score them, and depending on how thick the ice was. And then they would break them off with some of these tools right here. That saw up in the left-hand corner there is a crescent saw, and that saw they could go like this in the ice to cut it through if they needed to. So,
Okay.
and that's quite a rare saw there. We have a few of them here in the museum, and they're very rare.
Looks like you got some snow grips or with some spikes maybe for your
Oh, yeah.
feet. Is that what those
Yep.
are?
Yep. That's
Okay.
exactly what they are. You would put them on your feet because otherwise they'd be slipping all over the place.
Yeah.
And by the way, when a horse would fall through the ice and be stuck there, they'd have a hard time getting it out. But they would feed it oatmeal, and then the oatmeal would swell up and it would get them so they would float. That's how they would, and then they could try to get them out. They could try to, but yeah.
Well, this looks like a part of the museum. If you're wanting to, have a good scene for a horror flick, this would be a good spot to start.
It would be. Yeah, I never put it in that perspective, but yeah.
And
These
then you
are
can pan over to this other side, and you're still in the horror film.
yeah, the ones in front there on the bottom. Those are the ice plows that I said that
Right.
the
Hmm.
horses actually pulled, and the other ones are saws that they would cut and cut through the ice. Yeah.
So when you said your father would go out and he would come back, what would you say the percentage of the museum is built with the artifacts that your father got versus things that you collected over time? Or at some point, I would imagine that there's people like, oh, you have a museum. Will you take this? Was there a transition, or would you say that's a very small percentage of people just offering up things?
A few of the things are donated. There are items that are donated. It's very interesting. People want to have a place for the things that they love to go and know that they're going to go to a place where people can appreciate them. And the
Yeah,
trouble is, it's all kinds of stuff. They have stuff that isn't even ice related. And over the years, we've had to tell a lot of people, no, we can't take that.
Yeah.
But anything that is even remotely related to the ice industry, we would take. There's quite a bit in here that is uh, uh, donated items to the museum.
well, Chuck, I have to say, you're talking about your father. If he was still around, he may be taking those items too, because he sounded like he just like collecting a lot of different kinds of
Yeah,
things.
Yeah.
he did. He loved these items, the ice tongs there and the ice picks. He had probably easily thousands of ice picks and so many ice tongs. We had them just everywhere. We had one um, uh, beam. We put wood on the beam all the way across the museum, and we put ice picks all the way along it. He and I would be up there stapling them on there, and he'd be handing them and telling me where he wanted them on the display. But it was all the way across the museum.
So he had that envisionment of it all. We
Yeah.
have a book
Yes.
here, in one of the podcasts that we did, Ice by Amy Brady. Uh, Actually has a gentleman with one of those ice tongs. I'm not going to tell you I knew exactly what those were before going into the book. I could have probably surmised it, but now I fully know what those things are. But they do look like a medieval torture device.
I really like this sign that we're looking at: pre-war quality for pre-war prices. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
It is very interesting because as the industry was changing and going from natural ice to artificial ice, and artificial ice is when they started making it, indoors and in factories,
Mhm.
and but the people would try to say that that were cutting ice off the rivers and lakes. They would try to prove that was better ice than if you made it in a tank, and they would have slogans of why it's better, why it was better ice. Very interesting, and interesting that they called it artificial ice, the new stuff, because ice is ice as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
It's the same. It looks the same. It is the same thing.
Yeah.
But no, it was artificial ice, and they
Yeah.
didn't like it either. The old guys did not like it. The people
Right. It
did.
was changing the way of life, changing the dynamic. Amy talks about that in her book as well, that there was also a religious component that people were, I don't know if they were completely convinced themselves, but it was a propaganda that they were spewing, to say that, it was
It
not
was
holy and things like that.
unnatural, and
Unnatural.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
that's right.
replacing something God created or
of course.
something.
Yeah.
Well, I would surmise, or I wonder today, axe throwing is a big thing. So you may grab somebody may try to grab an axe on the other wall and come over here and try to hit that bullseye.
You're right. They might. They may. They have not. to this point. No.
Continuing our tour of the torture device
Yeah,
here. So.
more tools, and they would use anything that would work. It didn't have to be a tool specifically for the ice business, but if it would work, they would retrofit it to to make it work.
Is this like a chain net? Is that what that is?
Yeah, hmm
Yeah.
and that was
Okay.
that was to get all the pieces out of the area
The
they
floating
wanted.
blocks or the smaller floating pieces? Okay.
Yep. hmm
Makes sense.
That's a metal ice box. That was a little bit later than the wooden ones. Uh, in a round one too. They were most of them were like squared off, but that them some of them were round like that. Yeah.
Well, and I can tell who took the picture right here by the reflection in the glass right here. So we got a
And
little
I
good.
can't see it here, but
Yeah. So we've got two Chucks on camera at the same time right now. So
really,
it's just got a
uh,
reflection off of. It looks like that was behind glass that you got
yeah,
there. This is a beautiful piece that looks like
yes,
somebody would love to have in their home today.
yeah, that's a very ornate ice box, and a beautiful one at that, and real pricey too. To come across an ice box like that and then to acquire it was kind of pricey. Now,
Mhm.
by the way, and there's one next to it there to the left, and you can only see a little bit of it. It is not as ornate, and that is the old ice box that my dad had brought in, the old junk ice
Oh,
box
yeah, what you're talking
that was
about.
in
Okay.
our plant that I talked about before. And one Christmas, I decided to redo that ice box. Well, it was way before Christmas. It was probably 6 months or a year even before I got a hold of that ice box. I took it out of the plant and I took it home. I decided I was going to refurbish it. Big mistake. I did refurbish it, but it is the first and last thing that I will ever refurbish because it was a big job and I worked really hard at it. The top of it was all warped and I sanded it down. I planed it down and got it. It would really look nice. And on the inside, well, I had all the hinges re-chromed. On the inside, I had the thing that holds the ice chromed, and I painted the inside red because so many people were using them for liquor cabinets, the old ones. They would get a hold of these old ice boxes and they would use them for liquor cabinets.
Okay.
That was a big mistake because what I didn't realize, I didn't even think about it. My dad, he was an antiquer. He didn't want anything looking like new. He didn't want a liquor cabinet. He never said a word to me. I gave that to him redone
Mhm.
on Christmas Day, one year, uh, and he talked like he just loved it. But I know he was sick about what I did to that ice box.
You
But
had
yeah,
ruined it.
I have a
we put it
question. Go ahead, Chuck. Sorry, I apologize.
we put it. It was in the museum, still the way I refinished it, forever. He passed away, and it was still in there. Uh, and he never ever said, "What did you do to that ice box?" No,
Yeah.
he never said a bad word. And by the way, my dad and I were partners all the way through. And it's so interesting because he was very conservative because of uh, he lived through the um, the depression. He lived through the depression as a kid, and then in the milk business, the company that we had ended up the company. It was employee owned, and both he and I had the stock in it. Went bankrupt. So
Mm.
he was very conservative, and I was the other way. I wanted to grow. I wanted to go. I wanted to get stuff, get business. So we made a perfect partnership, you know. But all them years, we never had an argument. We would disagree on business things, not at home, not in business. We never had an argument about anything we did. So anyway, and you know what? It's interesting. I really didn't even realize that till he was gone.
Yeah.
So,
I could see how that could be.
so Chuck, I've got to ask. A little bird told me to ask about why I didn't see any pictures of the doll section of the museum.
Well,
You have-
the dowel section really has nothing to do with ice. And,
okay.
but the thing is that he's out buying all these artifacts. They go to all these flea markets and stuff. While he was buying all this stuff, my mother was out buying dolls and doll buggies. And she had such an extensive collection of dolls, and a lot of them were very valuable and just a great collection. And the really nice thing about it is when people came through the museum, there was something for everybody, even the women. Even the
Yeah.
women, the
Yeah.
families would come through, and there would be something there for everybody.
Very
And
cool.
so it was so good. That's what the doll collection was all about. And she had her place in the museum. In fact, she encroached upon areas that we didn't want her in. she would, and she pushed us back on a couple areas in the museum to put her dolls. Yeah.
Who manages the museum today?
About 3 or 4 years ago, up till that point, my sisters and I, uh, two sisters and myself, were trustees that ran the museum. And my one sisters have some health problems, and the other sister and myself we're all getting older. Got very hard. It got very hard, and we knew, and we had to find a path forward for this museum. We just had to. And so it was really hard, but the only options were we had nobody in our family that we knew they didn't have the passion. They're all good people, a lot of good people, but you got to have the passion for something like this.
Yeah.
So we made I'll shorten it right up here. We made a very hard decision to turn our ice museum over to our community foundation, and this foundation is run by professional people in our area, and we have a great manager of the museum of the foundation, and he has a group of people that work in to manage the foundation, and they're a giving foundation. They have all kinds of uh, areas that they give to, and the whole area donates to this community foundation, and they're all about giving and preserving. So this was the very best path forward for us. Also, this foundation, uh, they they want to promote the museum, and you can't just let a museum set because it'll just get stagnant. So they're having traveling exhibits come through. We did as well when we had it all them years.
Okay.
When my dad was alive and my sisters, we had traveling exhibits. This particular traveling exhibit here is taking over the whole upper part of our museum, and it's going to be here for a little bit. But it's a great traveling exhibit. Um, so that's kind of where we stand. But the path forward for this museum, it will go on forever, because when we sold our business, we donated money to our own foundation. We were a 501c3 foundation,
Mhm.
and we donated enough money to continue it. As long as it's managed properly, it can go on forever. It doesn't even have to have anybody come through the door. And we set up our foundation with our community foundation, and it's kind of got its own separate funding area, and that's the money that we funded it to run. So we are very confident that it will go on forever. And my one sister that works with us on the museum here, Susie, the other one is Judy, but Susie was an intricate part of our business. My dad and I were partners that had our ice business the whole time, but Susie was one of our key employees that ran whole distribution point in the Detroit area, a big distribution point. So she was just a hard worker. And her husband, Don, he is the one that completely redid this museum from the furniture store that it was, completely gutted it and redid the whole thing. He was a project manager, and he managed the whole redoing of this whole building, and that's how we got to where we are today.
That sounds great. And, I encourage anybody, if I'm ever up in that area, I'm certainly going to come by and visit the museum.
Love
I
that.
would love to see if there's any way, maybe in the future, the IPIA could get a few artifacts every year or display those at the IPIA,
That'd be kind of
to
cool.
have a few artifacts. I know there would be some shipping involved, but I think that would be a good way to, drum up some,
Some interest.
yeah, some interests, from other fellow ICE folks that may think, I've got a piece here or there. Just I think it could be a give take kind of relationship there as well. Wanted to ask a question, and
We
go
we
ahead.
did
What were you gonna say?
we did that. We did that. Oh, probably at a convention, maybe 8 9 years ago, roughly.
Okay.
We sent stuff over there, and so did um, uh, Pete Stack out of Pennsylvania. He has a collection as well, and Earl Schultz out of Wisconsin. He has a collection as well. And these folks, we know them and respect what they have, and they as well respect what we have. But they brought stuff to the convention as well. We had a nice
Oh,
display.
that's
I
cool.
think I think it was a one of our big conventions, a joint with the regionals. But yeah,
Well,
Okay.
we've got in 2025 we're gonna have
Yeah,
the
Nashville,
what's it called,
the grand event.
the grand event. Yeah, so
okay.
that would be a neat thing to bring up.
Well, I guarantee I was at that show, Chuck, because I've been to every IPIA for probably the last 13, 14, 15 years. So I guarantee I was there. So I probably even looked at it. But look, I'm not going to say I'm going to be able to remember all that. But
Isn't it? Yes, that's the. You know what? I know because I'm in the same way. We forget stuff, of course.
yeah, absolutely. So we've got an icebreaker I want to bring up to you real quick. So, what is like the weirdest? I mean, you could call it emergency, or that you've ever had to deal with in the museum during your time. Have you heard? And it could be like, a ghost sighting, mistaking a priceless piece of artifact for a souvenir. Somebody's walking out. I mean, what's anything interesting story you could tell us?
Okay, yeah. The one thing is that we in the middle we have an alarm system, of course, in the museum, and we had some glitches in it at first, and I'd be getting calls in the middle of the night. Oh my gosh, I just I would get these calls in the middle of the night, have to come down and meet the police down here and stuff. So that was really something I didn't care for very much, but um, that was one of the things that happened. Also, well, some other stories about the museum was. Um, I we were at my dad and mother and my wife and I were at a flea market on the East Coast someplace, and I was in one area and my dad was in another area, and I found a toy truck. It was a Buddy L toy truck that I knew was very valuable, and the price on it was $490. And so I found my dad and I said, "This booth over here has this ice truck. It's a Buddy L, and they want $490 for it." And he says, "I don't think it's Buddy L." I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Well, Buddy L is going to be way more than that." So I gets him back there, and he gets the ice truck and looks at it. Yeah, it's Buddy L. Looks at the price tag. I made a mistake. It was $4,900 for it. We already had a
Only
couple of
zeros
them.
at the end.
Yeah, and a couple of years later, I found another one. It was 6,800. Was what they're asking for. Was it? So
Hmm.
some of these items, this is just a little toy truck. Some of these items really got a little bit pricey.
Hmm.
Wow. Well, very good. Yeah. Do you have something you want to ask?
Well, I wanted to ask Chuck. You and I, before we got on the interview today, we kind of talked about that you had an involvement in a pretty big, I guess you could say, scandal almost, the DOJ investigation that has affected the ice industry. And I kind of wanted to give you a chance to kind of speak about that and your experience in it, and kind of, for anyone who hasn't heard about it, describe a little bit about what went on.
Sure. I'll start by saying that in one of the purchases that our company made of other companies, we bought a fairly good sized ice company in the Detroit area. And we, I knew of this ice company well before we started negotiating to buy it. But anyway, they had a salesman that, uh, tough, tough salesman. He was taking some of our business, and he was a pretty good and tough salesman. Anyway, we ended up buying that company, and we inherited this salesman, and we didn't have to bring him on board, but he was a good salesman. So anyway, he worked for us for probably 10 years, maybe. Uh, and after we sold the business the last day of 2004. Uh, Vicky and I, my wife, had taken just a great vacation, the two of us, to Tahiti. Went to several different islands down there and spent 3 weeks down there, and just relaxed and just the best time. And so we ends up flying back, get off the plane. The first thing I see on my phone was at a call from one of my investors that I was with. And he had something to do with some stock that I held in Arctic. And he said, there's an antitrust investigation going on. It just broke. And he said that it's got to do with Arctic. And I said, oh my gosh, well, that's no big deal. It's not going to involve us. Well, ended up it did. That salesman that I just talked about, uh, he was the whistleblower that went to the DOJ and FBI and said all kinds of stuff. And now at this point, he didn't work for us because we had sold out. Let's see, that was about around 2008. It's probably 3 years later. But he was disgruntled with Arctic, and Arctic fired him, and rightfully so, because he was making outrageous demands on them when we first sold, and he was working for them. So he just said all kinds of things, and he did know a few things about the other companies, but he was working for Arctic at the time. It had nothing to do with me, but he said he drugged me into it. I was sucked into it. Mm. And I ended up going to a meeting with the Arctic was paying my attorney fees because I was working for them at the time, and I had a expert antitrust attorney from Toledo and an expert antitrust attorney from Chicago. They were defending me, and we went to a meeting with the DOJ and the FBI in Cleveland. We went there, and they were in the meeting. I waited out in the lobby all day long, all day. And they came out at the end of the day. I'm shortening this up as much as I can, but they came out at the end of the day, and we sat down, had dinner, and talked about the whole thing. And they said they want you to. Main thing was and they kind of led up to this, because if they would have thrown it right at me, I think I would have just went off the deep end. But they built up to it, and they said they want you to plead guilty to this, this, and this. And they said, yeah, but I didn't do that. I didn't do them things. And they said, well, look, they say they've got this kind of evidence, and if you don't plead guilty, they said, our job is to keep you out of jail. And they said, if you plead guilty, you're not going to jail. And I said, yeah, but I didn't do these things. And they said, well, okay, you don't have to plead guilty. But they said, if you don't, they're going to go after your son. My son was just an employee, but he was an employee then for Arctic as well. And he was in the sales, but he wasn't in any meetings or anything. But they said, if you don't, they're going to go after your son. I thought, oh my God. They said, I said, well, when when do I have to make a decision on this? And they said, you got 10 days. So I goes home and I tell my wife all about this, Vicky, and we're talking. We were just beside ourselves. It was just a horrible, horrible
I
time
would
in my life.
imagine so.
It
Yeah, I
was
would imagine so.
terrible. And so we didn't know, I didn't know what to do. And a few days go by, and I honestly, to this day, I don't know what I would have done. I don't know how I could have pled guilty to something because I even said to the attorneys, I said, what about our friends? What about it? They said they won't pay any attention to it. Well, no, you can't say that
Mhm.
to me. I just can't. So anyway, a few more days went by. We get halfway, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, a week goes by. I call them up, haven't heard anything from them. Get close to the 10 days, and I call them up. They listen, we haven't heard from them. Just set tight. A few more days go by, few more days, more and more. Pretty soon, I don't hear from them. They said, okay, just let it set, let it set. Well, long story short, they didn't have anything on me. They didn't have anything. It was this sales guy that was saying terrible stuff that wasn't true. So, uh, long story short, it took me 8 or 9 years because it just so happened Arctic there was some revenue or monies left from our deal that was left in limbo, was in escrow until some things got settled. Because right during our negotiations, we had one of our semis up at our northern area plant uh, hit a mail truck and killed. It was an accident, but he killed the driver of the
Goodness.
mail truck, and so it threw our negotiations into turmoil. And part of the money from the sale was to be held back. And so, me being a principal at the time,
Hmm.
I was the major stockholder. So I was the one. I held all the liability for that whole thing going forward. So there was some residual monies left that were still being held. All that kept going for 8 or 9 years up until the time that salesman finished with his lawsuits on this whole thing. And he did settle. I think it was like 8 or 9 years later. And it was, I mean, I'm not going to get any real numbers on this, but he was in the millions that he was settling for. He settled for a very, very small amount. Uh, but, and then finally, after all that time, it went away. But it was a dark time of my life. And my wife too. We were just beside ourselves on what to do.
What I mean, I can sense the pain and the anguish, even this much time that has passed that you're feeling right now. So something terrible. Obviously, I don't know any of the details besides what you've described here, but I can tell a deep pain, deep hurt still
Yeah.
exists there. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a
And,
terrible.
and Ethan, it wasn't just me. I mean, this DOJ investigation affected a lot of people in our industry.
Yeah.
All the company. I mean, everybody, the big companies. Uh, Arctic. That's the only company I'm going to name here, but Arctic was the principal here. They ended up going bankrupt, and it wasn't just because of the DOJ investigation, but it had a lot to do with it because the fines that they got were very small compared to what their attorney fees were. Their attorney fees were horrendous. Their attorneys were the Jones Day firm that was the largest attorney firm in the United States at the time, and their attorney fees were so much. I had heard some numbers on what they were, and it was just unbelievable. Between that and the downturn of '08, that together, it put them. They went under. It went bankrupt. So
Yeah,
it
amazing.
and the DOJ, in the end, there wasn't any validity, very little validity to that whole investigation. Very little. I'm not going to go into any more of
Yeah.
the people or anything, but I don't know how they could even justify doing all the work that they did for what they got out of it.
Mm.
That sounds like a terrible situation, pretty much all the way around. So
Yeah, it was.
thank you for sharing that story with us though. And, just I guess in our world and the litigious nature of our society, it just, it's something we all have to deal with, potentially. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, Chuck, we are almost out of time. I mean, it's this time has flown by. We do want to go through, and we've got some pictures. We want to talk about your family, so it's going to take a little bit of time. But we're pretty much almost out of time, and we got so many more questions we want to ask. But we also need to try to keep this in time frame. So we want to go over and show some family pictures, and you describe what you see here. And I want to know who won the ugliest Christmas sweater this year.
Yeah, I think we all did. I I think we all did. That's a yeah. But that was a fun time, and that is our whole family at the time. And of course, we've got more grandchildren now.
Mhm.
We have a total of six. Let's see, there's one, two, three, four there, and we got one more on the way. So
All
we've
right.
Very
added to
cool.
our family since then.
Well, you guys, everybody got the assignment. Let's just say that they knew what they were doing here. So, is this Cliffs of Moher in
It,
Ireland?
it sure is. That's where it is, and that's Vicky and I, and we love to travel, and we've uh, we've done a lot of traveling, and that's part of. I didn't get to talk about our business, but it was so hard to sell our ice business, so
Mm,
hard. But my dad and I, we looked at everything, all of our partners, everybody, and we made a hard decision. And it took me several years to wind down and start enjoying myself without our business and without being in the industry.
mhm.
But once we got to this point, we love our lives now. We
Mm.
love to travel and we have so much fun. But yes, that is Ireland. Yep. That is Australia, of course.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Koala.
Oh, that is Punta Cana with with the at a
Oh,
monkey place off premise. We went off premise to go to this place, and it was so much fun. These monkeys would just get on all the kids, all of us. They would get on our shoulders and eat out of our. The guy would put stuff up in our hair, and they would eat. They would grab it and eat it out of there. But it was just our family just loved that vacation, and quite often now we are so blessed to be able to take our family, our total family, and we take them to these great vacations. Either
that's
every other year or every year, we take them to a great place. So
I'm sure all the monkeys in the Dominican are vaccinated for rabies.
Oh,
I'm sure.
yeah, this photo is quite interesting because that's Tom Settler and his wife Jenny, uh, and Terry. Terry was with him. He was traveling with him. He was taking care of him, I guess. And that's Vicky and I. That's in Paris. And Vicky and I were on a tour over there, and we were walking in the lobby of our hotel, and somebody says, "Hey, Chuck." And I looked around. It's Tom Settler,
oh
and
man.
and this is an example of the people in the ice industry because the Settlers are a very staunch competitor of ours. But you know what? They were friends of ours. We would go to conventions and drink with them and eat with them, and they're just great people. Now we'd get out on the street and beat each other up like crazy, but we ran into them over there, and we just had the nicest time.
I mean, you could see it running into somebody at the local Walmart or, hitting into them at the airport or something. But the same
Paris.
hotel in Paris, unless you got a Paris, Michigan. I mean, I assume you're talking about the France Paris. So,
It sure is. It's France, yes.
uh,
This is a IPI convention, and it was
Oh,
around
okay.
Halloween, and Vicky and I won first prize of dress up that year.
Cool.
Yeah,
if you didn't, there was going to be a crime committed. That's well, again, you guys understood the assignment on that one as well.
we did. Okay, now that is Vicky and I and my sister Susie and her husband Don. They were the folks I talked about. Susie's one of our trustees here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now we're on an advisory committee for our museum. Susie and I and Judy, but that's Don and Susie, and of course Don is the one that completely rebuilt our museum, and we traveled with them as well. That's in Hawaii.
Okay.
But again, Susie was such a main part of our company. Even though she wasn't a partner, she was just like a partner. She loved our company and worked so hard.
So is this 600 or 750 horsepower setting on the back of this boat? I mean, that is some legit power.
It is, and that's a formula boat that Vicky and I are big boaters, and we live right on the water, and we have a hoist behind our house, and we hoist it up. But yes, that's a formula boat with three 300s on it. It's got
Sorry,
900 horse.
my bad. I undersold you on your horsepower, and you know how you can't do that to a man. Okay, I know. So I'm sorry.
We love boating. Yes, we do.
All right.
I've yes, that is a beautiful. What is that? Is that almost a 30, 35 footer, 40 footer?
The boat is called a 35, but it's with the motors, it's actually 39 and a half feet long.
Shoot.
Hey, at least I gave you credit on that. I got that right, 35 and 40. So
Yeah.
I made up for it.
Now, when going back to that,
Yeah.
the water that it's on is the river behind our house, and we live on that river. But that river leads out into the Sinclair River that divides us from Canada, which is about a mile, well, a mile and a half away from there is the Sinclair River, and then the mouth of Lake Huron. So we got all kinds of water to go boating in.
Very
That,
cool.
the water looks fabulous. It
Yeah.
looks very clear, beautiful. So
That is another family vacation. I think that one was Bahamas.
beautiful.
Okay.
And that one is, of course, Mexico, Cabo, and
Okay.
that's our two granddaughters. That is our photo outside of our living room window, and that's the river that we live on behind the house there. And we that land there, my grandparents lived next door, and they owned all this land right here. My great grandparents lived about 13 houses down that the other way, and they had a plot of land. And this is at probably the turn of the century, 100 years ago. They had a plot of land which was 160 acres along the river. So this land means so much to us, and we count our blessings every day to be able to live there and have the things that we have. And anyway,
I think you need. I think you need to let your hair down and enjoy retirement a little bit more. I don't think you're quite there yet.
That's the one thing about this age is my hair is turned white. I don't have. There's only a few strands left, and it's a horrible thing. I enjoyed good, nice long hair years and years ago, not anymore. So
So you are letting your hair down. Is that what you're saying? What you got?
a little bit. Yeah.
Well,
Chuck,
we're out of time.
yeah,
I mean,
we've had so much fun talking to you. We had about 64 more questions.
That's
we
right.
wanted to ask you.
Enjoyed it so much. I wanted to talk more about the association and how much we loved it and how much it helped our company. But I know time is of the essence here. So
We'll have to maybe have you back on another time to talk about that, because we know that you were involved in Hurricane Katrina. There's other things, and we had other questions we want to ask you about the museum. But that to me, that's a sign of a good interview and a good conversation. And I say interview, we try to have conversations, with our guests. So we really appreciate it.
It was a conversation. I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Chuck. We've been coming to you from the Routeman Studios from KCS headquarters in Pelham, Alabama. We've really enjoyed your time. We appreciate all you've done for the industry and what you continue to do. Thank you.
I've enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Bye, Chuck.